Expansion and Realignment, 1840-1875. There was a transition from agriculture to industrial economy within the United States. The transition from agriculture to industrial economies occurred with the arrival of industrial technologies from Europe. We see improvements in agricultural productivity, and industrialization requires specific types of sites. They need a proximity to large quantities of raw materials to produce the energy for their industrialization process. And they need accessibility to the suppliers and to the markets to sell their goods. So industrialization creates new types of cities. One would be the power cities. Power cities are those that are attractive to industries that need large quantities of energy, like in Lawrence, Kansas, figured here in the picture. Before coal, this meant running water. So fall line towns grew in New England and the Appalachian Mountains of the eastern United States. Mining towns, especially in the western United States, grew up around the extraction of raw materials like coal and ore. In Arizona, this was especially true in southern Arizona with the mining towns of Bisbee and Tombstone. There would also be transportation centers where their new economic space occurred because of their function of being either along rail lines, canal lines, or along riverways. In the western United States, we'd see this a little bit around stagecoach lines, like that of Tucson. Expansion and realignment with industrialization in new cities. We begin to see heavy manufacturing towns beginning to arise. These would be dependent on large volumes of raw materials, or steam-powered riverboats, rail systems, and inner port cities began to develop, like Pittsburgh, or Three River City, figured in the upper right, as well as Aurora, Indiana, and cities along the Mississippi. Railway development was central to the evolution of the new industrial economy, as can be seen in this distribution of population in railways in 1850s. We can see that the density of railroads occurred in the Northeast, but were starting to be well covered throughout the eastern United States up through the Mississippi region. And you can see that large spot of rails in the Central Valley of California, primarily occurring because of the gold rush. The Iron Horse, as it was called, extended the urban system to the continental scale. So this is where we start seeing economies of scales rising, where cities no longer were constrained by the location and accessibility of their hinterland markets, but could increase their scale and their dominance of economic activities to larger and larger transportation hubs and their connection to them. The effects of the railroad on city growth. One outcome of this was we'd see slow development along the old river cities, and it spurred development along two east-west corridors. So we could see the development of growth of cities along the Great Lakes area and through this middle part between Pittsburgh, Baltimore, St. Louis. One of the concepts that comes from interpreting this new economic models of industrialization is the interpretation of central places. That during the 1800s and 1900s, urban systems appeared to have much in common, both in terms of their size, distribution, and spatial patterns of the cities. Central place theory was one of the most common ways to interpret these regularities. Central place theory was one of the most common ways to interpret these regularities. Central place theory comes from Walter Christaller, a German geographer, 1893 through 1969. You know you're a geographer when your favorite toy as a child, as Christaller's was, was the atlas. In 1933, he published Central Places in Southern Germany. He proposed a theory to explain the patterns of urban settlements. This was based on the economic activities of goods, services, and the supply and demand for those goods and services. So central place theory defined is the distribution of settlements reference to the supply of goods and services. All products and services have two spatial attributes according to central place theory. First, they have a threshold, or the minimum number of consumers needed to support its supply, and they also had a range, the range related to how far, depending on their value and how far a person was willing to travel to purchase that item. So a threshold could be the population size, where the range would be the spatial domain within which a person was willing to go to purchase that supply. So consumers need a variety of products to create a central place. And a product itself needs a minimum number of consumers to support its existence in that central place. So towns with many goods and services are regional retailing centers, whereas smaller cities and places serve only intermediately for their local vicinity. Whereas central places will have much more services. They have a much greater threshold to be able to have larger goods and services. So because of this, we see a differing size and function, or their threshold or range, of cities. In short, what Christaller was getting at was that there was this idea of a nested hierarchy of central places. So here's this idea kind of conceptualized with a diagram. So here we see a hierarchy of central places where A represents the largest honeycomb scale, B being a slightly smaller city size, and C being more like a village or town with lower size of threshold and range. So think of products and how far you'd be willing to go to purchase them. So for a product like milk, it might be that town size of a C, where you go to your local grocery store or local market to purchase it. How about when you're getting married and you want to go buy a ring? Would you go down to the half-price retail center, or would you go to a nice local store? And think of how thresholds and ranges change now with the information age, where you can do these purchases online, which kind of disrupts Christaller's theory of central places. How about a car? How far would you be willing to drive to go shop for a car? And we see these clusterings of services like automobiles in mid-sized cities where you don't see car dealers. In smaller cities, it takes a certain threshold from within which for these services to be. So the conclusion is towns of the same size will be evenly spaced, according to Christaller, where more smaller cities will exist. Larger towns have to be further apart because to be able to have that many goods and services, they need a large number of people to create that threshold to draw from. But towns are always interdependent with cities and with one another. And if one town or city was eliminated, there would have to be a readjustment of the grid. Some of the critiques of the central place theory was that it was very general and valid in some regions of the world, but not in others. It was particularly applicable for southern Germany and agricultural areas where the topography was flat, but it didn't work great where there was large variation of topography, like high mountain ranges and such, or large deserts in the West.